Hi everyone, I'm Ava, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my experiences speaking and learning the beautiful Dutch language. These days, I've been telling Dutch people that I actually prefer speaking Dutch to English, and I love hearing their responses because their responses are really varied. So I get responses like, Dutch is really not pretty, I don't understand, why do you like speaking Dutch, why don't you just speak English? To Dutch is the language of the gods. That was an actual quote from someone. I personally find the language really pretty, and I know that sometimes when I say that, Dutch people look at me in disbelief, but I'm here to set the record straight. I think the language is beautiful. I don't know what it is, something about the sounds, something about the vowels and the way the sentences come together. I just find it so freaking beautiful. So in this video, I want to talk to you about my background speaking and learning Dutch, some funny hiccups I've had while learning Dutch, things that I still struggle with in Dutch, and the books and TV shows that I've used to, well, improve my Dutch. And that is where I could really use your help and recommendations. Let's get started. So I started learning Dutch about 3.5 years ago, something like that, back in the US. Where I was lucky enough that at my university in the US, where I was getting my PhD, they actually offered a Dutch course that I could just take for free. I know that was an extremely lucky coincidence because Dutch isn't a language that's normally taught in schools and universities in the US. In my Dutch class, there are often about 6 people, and I have to say that all in all, in the couple of years that I took Dutch at the universities, I had a fantastic experience, mostly because I had a fantastic instructor, so he definitely helped me grow my love for the language. At my university, there weren't any advanced Dutch courses, so they were beginner and intermediate courses, and I kind of just sat in. I didn't officially take them. I didn't put as much effort into it as I would have if I was taking that class for, grades, or if I was being graded on it. I took it because it was fun. One of the questions that I got very often when I told Dutch people that I was taking this class is that they were surprised that it was being offered, and they were really curious to see who were the people who were taking these classes. And I have to say, besides the odd person who took it because Dutch fit into their schedule really well, besides that odd person or two, they were often 2 types of people. Type of person 1, like me, people who were dating other Dutch people. Turns out that a lot of people meet you wonderful traveling Dutch folk around the world, we fall in love, and then we're in the US and we think, hey, we want to move to the Netherlands at some point, let's take Dutch. I have met several people in the same position as me. The other type of person taking these Dutch courses are Americans with Dutch heritage. And that I found really very cool because some of them have grandparents who are Dutch. And they really just wanted to immerse themselves in their family's cultures. I had people whose parents were from Belgium or the Netherlands. Then I also, funnily enough, had Dutch people who were international students at my university taking this class for an easy grade. I mean, I'm assuming that's why they took intermediate Dutch. Their Dutch was really good. They made me look bad. They made everybody look bad because they spoke perfect Dutch. If this sounds confusing, at American universities, even if your concentration or your major, what we call it, is completely different, so like advertising or math, you still need to take language courses, you still need to take English courses, English literature courses. So that's why some of these people just took the class. So I sat in on these courses for a couple of years, and I didn't really practice too much. I didn't have people to practice it with, as you might imagine, in good old Philadelphia. I did have some chances, so I tried to use those. But what really helped is when I actually moved here last year. The second week that I moved, I enrolled in a Dutch intensive course, and I took intermediate Dutch with several other expats. And that was a really fun experience. As you can imagine, for someone who had just moved to a new country, it was nice spending some time with like-minded people who were interested in not just living in the Netherlands, but also immersing themselves in the culture a little. So that was a little bit of background. Now, I will say that being a native speaker of English, I experienced some quite interesting things when I try to speak Dutch to people. So when I first moved, or even when I would come visit on holiday, I would often find that no matter what I said, people would always speak English back to me. And I think I was really surprised because in learning other languages, that hadn't happened to me quite as often as it did here in the Netherlands. Now, part of that is that I was in Amsterdam. They automatically hear an accent and they just switch to English. They're just so used to it. So many tourists don't speak Dutch. And while I appreciated them speaking my language, I think in the beginning I was just a little shocked because I felt like I was doing something wrong. So of course I started doubting myself and my language skills, blah, blah, blah. But after some time, my girlfriend who was Dutch, very quickly told me that people are just trying to be nice. And if I just continue speaking in Dutch or tell them that I'm learning Dutch, things will be fine. And things were fine after that. Also after my Dutch improved a bit so that I wasn't holding up the conversation. Although I'll always remember this one time I went to a Bagels and Beans in Amsterdam and I tried to speak very elementary Dutch. So I said things like, mag ik een cappuccino alsjeblieft? With the exact kind of accent I did right now. And, you know, the person clearly understood that my Dutch was not as good. So he was very great in being like, oh, do you want a bonnetje? To try and explain to me what things were. And I think that was just so great. So while I've had many, many good experiences speaking, practicing Dutch, and many of my girlfriend's friends are really great in speaking Dutch to me and they don't switch to English, I have had some really funny hiccups, I would call them, that when I tried to speak Dutch. These are times when I tried to speak Dutch and have completely failed. Or I think I've completely failed because the person responds to me in really sassy English. Maybe they didn't mean to be sassy. Maybe English is a sassy language. So I have two such stories that I remember. And one of them is when I was actually in Belgium and in Antwerp. And I was at a bar and I wanted to order this new beer that they had. And in English, I would pronounce this beer as Wild Joe. I was trying to speak Dutch. I really, really wanted to be Dutch. And so I thought to myself, if they pronounce coffee company as koffie company, then, oh, and if they say things like Wi-Fi instead of Wi-Fi, not always, I know, but I thought to myself, they probably pronounce this beer as Wild Yo. So I go up to this bartender who looked about my age and I say, mag ik een Wild Yo alsjeblieft? And she looks at me and goes, you mean a Wild Joe? And I was completely taken aback because, well, I knew how to pronounce it in English. But anyway, these kinds of funny things often happen when you speak another language, of course. But I have to say, I don't think she meant to sound sassy, but it sounded quite sassy. Another time when I had a funny incident like that, or I thought was funny at least, it was not like a ha-ha funny, but you know, like a, oh my god, this is so embarrassing kind of funny. I went to a cafe to work and I wanted the Wi-Fi password. And I made the mistake of saying, mag ik de wifi wachtwoord alsjeblieft? And the person, of course, looks at me and switches to English immediately because I had made the terrible mistake of saying the word instead of het word. And she just looks at me and goes, the Wi-Fi password is over there. And I swear, I'm not trying to make this up. I feel like in both of these cases, they sounded quite sassy. But I think English is just a sassy language. This is not their fault. They were being very nice speaking to me in my language. Okay. So these kinds of hiccups, as I said, pretty common when you're trying to speak a foreign language, but it happens as an American speaking Dutch. And I think my American accent definitely helps people just switch to English. I've had conversations, and I do some volunteer work, and I've had conversations in my volunteer group where we're speaking Dutch, and then all of a sudden people will start speaking English, and they're very confused about it. But that's just because I'm there, and they catch themselves like, I just don't know why I'm speaking English, and it's my accent, I know. Okay, so other than my accent, there are a few things that I still struggle with in Dutch. I guess some things have to do with pronunciation. In English, when we use words with articles, we use the. In Dutch, it's not that easy. You either have the common gender, de, or you have the neuter, which is het. And quite often, there is no reason to why something should be de or het. And honestly, it doesn't matter how many times I try to remember which is which, I fail. And also, sometimes, for instance, I know it is het woord, but when I use it in a different context, like wifi wachtwoord, I almost tend to revert back to duh. I don't know why that is. So that is something I definitely still struggle with. One of the things I do to kind of get around this, and I think many people learning Dutch as a second language might use this tactic, is to make everything into a diminutive. So add the ch at the end of it. So instead of saying beer, where I have to think about is it het or de beer, I just say biertje, and any word that ends with the ch is a het word. It got a little crazy when I started saying things like for your OV chip card, which is what you use to take public transport here. Instead of just saying OV chip card, I use this tactic so much that I say things like OV chip kaartje, which sounds really terrible. It is wrong. Don't say that. Apparently that's not correct. I also go to the Albert Heijn and use my bonus kaartje. I know that's not right. But it's just, I'm so used to using this tactic to get around the duh and het issue that I start making these silly mistakes. Now, another thing that I struggle with has to do with pronunciation. Of course. Now, you guys might be thinking about the infamous G sound, the h, in words like gezellig. Now, as much as I find that difficult, I actually find words that are spelled with the SCH even more difficult. And the G and the SCH are the same sound, but the words around it, the sounds around it, tend to be different, and those are the ones that I struggle with. Now, maybe I'm making this up, but I definitely struggle with these words. For instance, I cannot pronounce the word for shed. It's just impossible. Schuur. Can't do it. Some other words that are notoriously difficult, the airport, Schiphol, can't do it. And of course, there's always the one that people tend to bring up, Scheveningen, which I still cannot do. It is extremely difficult. Along the pronunciation lines, I definitely have some mix-ups because Dutch has long vowels and short vowels. So I honestly have trouble distinguishing the sounds in the words. So to me, huur and huur sound the same. I don't even know if I pronounce them differently. Yes, my friends, the pronunciation struggle in Dutch is never ending. But I hope that someday I will get better at it. And finally, I wanted to share the media, like books and TV shows that I use to learn Dutch and also learn a little bit about Dutch culture. And I wanted to see if you all had any suggestions for me or people like me trying to learn Dutch and who would also not just like to learn about the language, but also the culture by reading children's books and watching fun TV shows. And I would say one of the easiest and fun ways in which I have been able to learn new words is by reading Jip and Janneke. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jip and Janneke are two little children who are very naughty. And they do naughty things, and these little short stories are about the things that they do, the adventures of Jip and Janneke. So I really liked reading Jip and Janneke, not just to learn new words, but also because it is really such a part of Dutch culture. So I thought it was fun for me to read this series and hear about the stories that my partner grew up with. One of my other first exposures to Dutch media was, and now this is a little bit terrible, but was this song that went really viral around the world for its video, and that song is Drank en Drugs. I came across this song before I spoke a word of Dutch, and let me tell you, I learned quite some Dutch from that song. So since then, I've definitely come across songs that are not quite so crass. For instance, 15 million mensen, that was one of the songs that I learned. Of course, the population of the Netherlands has increased somewhat since the release of that song, but I like it nonetheless. And finally, Dutch TV shows. Back in Philadelphia, where I lived, there was actually a small group of us who either spoke Dutch or were Dutch, so I was the non-Dutch person, and there were a couple of other Dutch people who all wanted to watch Wie is the Mol. Now this was 4 years ago at a time where my Dutch was basically non-existent, but I found that watching Wie is the Mol each year has helped my Dutch get better. Each year that I watch a new season of Wie is the Mol, I find that I understand even more and I learn a lot more. To be quite honest, besides my friends, I started watching Wie is the Mol because at the time I thought Art Royakkers was just so damn pretty. I love the presenter now too, but I'm just gonna be honest with you, that's why I started watching it. And now I watch other Dutch TV because I realized my world is bigger than art. Anyway, so those are my experiences learning and speaking Dutch. I would love to hear from you guys if you guys have any experiences with people learning Dutch or if you're learning Dutch yourself.